Shabbas, Dafim Kuf Mem Zayin through Kuf Nun Gimel. On Daf Kuf Mem Zayin, the Gemara talks about shaking out a talus. Haminar Taliso. The Gemara says, is chayav chatas. You shake out a talus, it's malacha deraisa, you're chayav chatas. However, the Gemara gives various criteria. Depends whether it's new. If it's new, that's more of, you accomplish more and it's chayav chatas. If it's old, then not. Depends whether it's black, a very dark color, as opposed to chivri besumki, white or red, then it's not a problem. Depends whether you're makbid. The Gemara doesn't say exactly what you're shaking it out from. That is a machlokes rishonim. Some rishonim learn you're shaking it out from dew. It got wet, it got soaked with dew. Other rishonim learn you're shaking it out from dust. Rashi learns you're shaking it out from dust. The Shulchan Aruch says if you shake it out from dew, you're chayiv. Certainly from rain. And the Ramah says yesh omrim. Some say that the Isser applies even to shaking it out from dust, as long as you're makbid on the dust, and it's good to be choshesh for that shita. The Ramah says it's good to be choshesh for that shita. El Yerabah, the Mishnah Berurah brings, says that Medina it's usher. Many poskim say that the Gemara is talking about dust. So according to this shita of Rashi, which poskim say you should be choshesh for, Medina even shaking out a garment from dust is usher, could be even a chiyav chatas. However, the Mishnah Berurah says that since it's machlokes, so even though you should be makmer l'chatchila, but if you're having it done by a non-Jew, then you can be lenient. Even though normally you can't have a non-Jew do malach if you're on Shabbos, but you can have it, since anyway, some Rishonim say the Gemara is not talking about dust, you can have it, you can shake out dust via a non-Jew. Also, there's the question of covered abrios, if the clothing, if you'll look, if you'll be embarrassed, if you won't look proper, this covered abrios issue. So you can have a non-Jew shake it out. But also a person should be careful. The Mishnah Berurah says, when you put your hat down, you put your clothes down, put them down somewhere they won't get dirty, they won't get dusty, because if they do, it's not so simple. Shaking it out could really be a problem on Shabbos. The dust that we're talking about, poskim explain, is only dust that gets absorbed into the fabric between the fibers of the fabric, but dirt or dust just on the surface to just brush it off, that's not a problem. Unlike laundering clothing is usher at all. Any kind of laundering, any kind of dirt, getting it out with water is always usher. This kind of cleaning, just dust, even if we worry about Rashi Shita that brushing out dust trapped in the fibers is usher, that's only if there's enough that you're makbid. What does makbid mean? So it's subjective. It depends whether you would wear the garment outside or not. Post can grapple with the question of, the Gemara gives several different factors, whether it's black or a lighter color, whether the garment is black or a lighter color, whether you're makbid, whether it's new or old. So the ikar is whether you're makbid. If it's not clear whether you're makbid, if you're not sure whether you're makbid, then you follow these other guidelines. If Simcha Bunim Cohen explains, post can bring, if it's dark and it's new, we say that you would be makbid, you wouldn't wear the garment. If not, then we say minastam. If you don't know, then we say you're not makbid. But again, if you know you're makbid, you should be makmer. And if you know that you're not makbid, you can be mekil. These things, we paskin, these things are just to help determine whether you would be makbid or not. Even when you're allowed to shake off the dust, according to these various criteria, it's only a little dusty, you're not makbid, you cannot use a brush. You cannot use a brush to act, like a hat brush or a clothes brush, to actually remove the dust. You also can't rub the garment or shake it vigorously. All you can do is brush lightly with your hand. Those are the cases that it is mutter. In a case where there's a serious amount of dust and it's really humiliating to wear the garment and you don't have the solution of a non-Jew, then post can say, Rabbi Cohen brings, you can rub it off kilachar yad using your elbow in an unusual way. That becomes a shinoi, even though the Gemara says chayav chatas. Once you do it with your elbow or in an unusual manner, that's a shinoi. And because of covered abrios for human dignity, you're allowed to do an Issa D'Rabbanan to preserve covered abrios. The Gemara goes on, the Gemara talks about using towels. The Gemara says you can use a towel. If you bathe, you get wet on Shabbos, you can use a towel. But, so the Mishnah actually says you're not allowed to carry the towel unless you have 10 people. If there are 10 people carrying it together, then that's different, then you can use it. But a single person in the normal way who uses a towel can't carry it. But the Brisa says that a person is allowed to use the towel and carry it. That's how we pass him. You don't need 10 people. The reason the Mishnah said you shouldn't carry it is because we're afraid you'll squeeze out the towel. Schita is asur on Shabbos. Squeezing out a garment is asur. So one person might forget and do schita. We pass him like the Brisa. We pass him that there's no gzeira that you're allowed to carry the wet towel, bring it home, after you use it on Shabbos. Why not? What is pshat in the halacha that we're not worried about schita? The poskim gives several reasons, at least 3 different reasons why there's no concern. One reason the Magen Avraham brings is that bathing was considered very important. People couldn't function properly. It was intolerable not to bathe. And when you bathe, you need a towel. So Chazal felt that that they have to allow bathing, they have to allow towels, they have to make an exception because they have to make an exception to the regular gzera. Ordinarily, you're not allowed to handle soaking wet garments, and they made an exception here because bathing was essential. Magen Avraham actually proposes, Bisman Hazeh, in his time, the standards of personal cleanliness weren't so high, and people could tolerate not bathing, so maybe it should be us, he says. Or maybe you say, no, since Chazal didn't make this gzera, we don't make it ourselves. This Magen Avraham is often brought in these discussions when Chazal carved out an exception to a gzera, but the rationale for the exception doesn't apply Bisman Hazeh. Can we still have the leniency of Chazal or not? Magen Avraham goes back and forth. The Mishnah Berurah brings that Bisman Hazeh, the Magen Avraham does conclude it's better not to rely on this leniency. It's better to use the type of garment that you're not makbid on the water, so we're not choshesh that you're going to squeeze it out. So the Mishnah Berurah brings this, and Magen Avraham is mashma that lechatchila you should use a type of garment that you don't care if it's wet, so you're not going to come to soak it out. He brings from the Gaon that the towels always fall into that category. You don't care if your towel is wet, you're not going to come to soak it out. And that's actually this idea of the Gaon. That's the second explanation of the Gemara. The reason that they allowed you to handle towels, even though you're normally not allowed to handle a wet garment because we're afraid you'll squeeze it out, is because we're not afraid you're going to squeeze it out if it is a garment that you're not makbid. If it's wet, and towels, the heter here is about a towel, which is a garment that you don't care if it is wet. A third heter of the poskim is that we're talking about a small quantity of water that we're talking about getting the towel wet with only a small quantity of water, and therefore there's no gzera that you're going to come to squeeze it out. The Mishnah goes on. The Mishnah says, Lo mis'amlin. You're not allowed to exercise vigorously. Rashi explains it means to swing your arms, to open and fold your arms back and forth, to get hot and sweat. What's the Isser? So the Shulchan Aruch says the Isser is the form of refuah. Sweating was believed to be therapeutic. Chazal prohibited many things on Shabbos because there are forms of refuah, and if it's refuah, we're afraid that you'll grind the herbs, grind the ingredients for refuah, so you'll do the refuah a different way that involves herbs, and you'll grind them. So it's all gzeira that you might come to do malacha. So according to the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam, the Isser is a form of refuah. Others learn that the Isser is uvdim d'chol. We discussed previously, hard to define uvdim d'chol. It's an un-Shabbosdik type of act, and so other posts can learn the Isser of misamlin is because of uvdim d'chol. If it's uvdim d'chol, it's not limited to the sick. Refuah is limited to people who are sick. If you're somewhat sick, for someone who's completely sick, you're allowed to do a refuah. Someone who's only a little bit sick, you shouldn't do a refuah. But a healthy person, typically, the prohibitions of refuah don't apply. But if the Isser is uvdim d'chol, then the Isser would apply even to a healthy person. And that's the question. Poskim debate different types of therapy or just ordinary exercise that we do. Physical therapies or exercise, you're allowed to do them on Shabbos. Is that included in the prohibition of ein misamlin? So if it's a form of refuah, it might be limited only to cholim. If it's a form of uvdim d'chol, it would apply to everyone. Some say that even if it's a form of refuah, this type of prohibition of refuah applies even to healthy people. Others say that poskim say it has to do with sweating. So even though we often sweat from exercise, some poskim say if you're doing the type of exercise that you're not likely to sweat, it's okay. Other poskim say that if you use language that if your goal is not to cause you to sweat, perhaps even if you do sweat, it's okay. So it's a big machlokus whether exercise for an ordinary healthy person is permitted or prohibited on Shabbos. The Mishnah goes on. The Mishnah says, "V'lo misgarden." You're not allowed to scrape yourself, to rub yourself with a scraper. Why not? So again, Rashi says, "Uvdim d'chol." The Gemara elaborates on this. The Gemara says, if you have dirt or excrement on your body, then you can scrape it off. And the Gemara says, about Rabbi Shmuel bar Yehuda, his mother made him a magrarta de kaspa, a silver scraper for use on Shabbos. This is the idea that uvdim d'chol can be avoided by having a separate implement for use on Shabbos, separate and different implement, a nicer implement maybe, for use on Shabbos. This is brought by the poskim. When the poskim discuss brushing teeth on Shabbos, there are a whole variety of halachic yisurim. schita and mareach and making your gums bleed. But one of the issues they discuss, even if there's no actual malacha, one of the things they discuss is uvdin d'chol. Toothbrushing, they say, again, it's hard to define what uvdin d'chol is, but some poskim are concerned about uvdin d'chol, weekday activities. So some poskim, Rav Adi Yosef and Rav Yitzchak Weiss and Yabia Omer and Minchas Yitzchak, they say that a person should ideally have a separate toothbrush for Shabbos. Maybe separate, maybe different or better, nicer. A person should have a separate toothbrush for Shabbos to avoid the question of uvdin d'chol. I believe that Rav Aryeh Leibowitz and Rav Schechter's Talmidim bring that he felt that toothbrushing is not uvdin d'chol, but some poskim said toothbrushing might be uvdin d'chol, and you can avoid that based on this Gemara by having a separate type of toothbrush for Shabbos. Taf Kuf Mem Ches, the Mishnah begins on Kuf Mem Zayin. The Mishnah talks about if you have a shever, a broken limb, to replace the bone where it's supposed to be. The Mishnah says you can't do that on Shabbos, and you can't replace the shever. The Gemara says, though, brings different opinions. The Gemara says on Kuf Mem Ches, halacha machzirin as a shever. You are allowed to return a broken bone to where it's supposed to be. Shulchan Aruch, when he brings this halacha about machzirin as a shever, Shulchan Aruch brings in even not just a broken bone, even a dislocated bone, even if it's nishmata, it's slipped out of place. So the Mishnah Berurah says, Shulchan Aruch says, etzem sheyatzim makoma machzirin, so you are allowed to return it. If it's yatza, you can return it. If it's nishmata, elsewhere the Shulchan Aruch brings the other part of the Mishnah, if the bone slipped out of place, you shouldn't rub it too much because that's a refuah, but you can bathe it, and if that heals it, it's okay. But a bone that's dislocated, yatzim makomo, you can replace. Magen Avram disagrees. Magen Avram says nishbar, shever we paskin that you are allowed to replace. But a dislocated bone, you're not allowed to. You're not even allowed to rub it because that's considered refuah. You certainly can't replace a dislocated bone. Only a broken bone you can replace, but not a dislocated bone. Other Achronim, the Shulchan Aruch the poskim bring, says, no, a severe dislocation, it's entirely in the wrong place, is considered sakanas aver, that's very dangerous, you can lose the limb, use the functionality of the limb. That's exactly the same as nishbar. Shulchan Aruch is right, you have to return it, you have to put it back in place right away, or it can suffer permanent damage. Even a Yisrael can do it, certainly a non-Jew. So that which the Shulchan Aruch and based on the Mishnah say you're not allowed to treat it by rubbing it, that's when it's a non-complete dislocation. But a complete dislocation, then that's like broken, you can set it right away, you can put it back right away. They bring other poskim hold like that too. The Chai Adam, the Aruch HaShulchan say that you are allowed to, if the bone is completely dislocated, you're allowed to replace it. Mishnah Berurah brings it, even according to the Magen Avram, is machmer. But if the doctor diagnoses it and says this is dangerous, if you don't fix this, you can lose the limb, then you would be, even Magen Avram would agree, you would be allowed to. Contrary-wise, even in cases where you're going to do it, Nishmas Avram brings, as long as it's not a question of life and death, if it requires anesthesia, you should do the anesthesia in a way that it doesn't constitute malacha d'oraisa. Do the anesthesia in such a way that it's only malacha d'rabbanan. You're not going to do a malacha d'oraisa if there's no sakanah nefashos involved. The next parak Shoel, begins. The Mishnah says you're allowed to borrow stuff, wine and oil, but you're not allowed to use the language halveni. You have to use the lashon shoel. In Hebrew, there are two different words for borrowing: shoel and halva, she'ela and halva. The Gemara asked, what's the difference? Why is the term hashileni better than halveni? So the Gemara says it has to do with writing. The prohibition against borrowing is because you might come to write. So hashileni is short term. It's a short term loan, so you're not going to write. Halveni is an unusual term. Halveni means a longer term loan, and since we don't let you use halveni, we tell you have to use the term hashileni only. Then that's a heker that makes it noticeable. You're not going to come to write. So we pass in this way in Shulchan Aruch. If you want to borrow something on Shabbos, you can't say halveni, which implies long term, and you might come to write. You should say hashileni, which is short term. And that's a heker, that's a distinction, so there's no gzera that you'll come to write. The poskim talk about what happens in a place where stam halva, the minhag is that it's demandable immediately. When the Gemara says lamed yom, but in some places the minhag is you can demand a halva to return it immediately. So the Mishnah Berurah says then you can say halva too, because if halveni means immediate, then the Magen Avram says you can use the language halveni also, but the Halachos says not necessarily, because the truth is the Shulchan Aruch they bring a chumrah that b'lashon laz in other languages we don't have two different words hashileni and halveni like English. We just say borrow. We have one word for borrow. So then you can't say borrow at all because there's no hecker. You have to say tainly, give it to me. You can't say borrow at all because there's no hecker and you may come to right. Similarly, if you in a place where Hashileni and Halveni both mean immediate, there's no distinction between them. The Mishnah Berurah says that could be like Balash and Laz, where they don't have two words at all. Then it will be Asr. I'll call upon the rule is you have to have some distinguishing term. If Hashileni and Halveni are different, you have to say Hashileni. If they mean the same thing, maybe you can say either one. Maybe you should still say a different term. And in a language that doesn't have two different words, you should use a different term to avoid the gzeira that you might come to write. Daf Kuf Mem Tes, again, going back to the Mishnah on Kuf Mem Ches, talks about counting your guest, listing your guest, the person's making a suda, a party. So it says you're allowed to do it from memory, but not from a written list. You're not allowed to read guests off a written list on Shabbos. Why not? So the Gemara says two gzeras. One gzera is Shema Yimchok. You might make adjustments in the list by erasing. The other gzera is that reading the guest list is usher because you might come to read Shtari Hadyotos. You might come to read business documents. And reading business documents, Chazal said is usher. You're not allowed to read business documents on Shabbos. So as we're going to see, Chazal extended that gzera and forbade reading all kinds of documents, including guest lists. The Gemara has a debate which of these reasons is the ramifications of implications of each of these reasons. We paskin that both reasons apply. When either reason applies, it is usher, that you might come to erase, and the concern for Shtari Hadyotos, it is gzeira, if you read one thing, you might read another thing. The Mishnah Berurah says that a shamash, if you have a servant or an attendant who's arranging the Suda, can he read? So some say that it's still a problem, because even if there's no gzeira that he'll erase, because that's only the owner of the owner of the Suda might erase. The other gzeira, if it's a gzeira that you can't read anything, because you might read Shtari Hadyotos, still applies. But if it's a Suda's mitzvah, you can be lenient, because, as the Gemara explains throughout these dafim, that the Isser of Mitzvah Cheftzcha V'dabar Davar, of speaking and doing these types of things on Shabbos, which are not malachas, those Yisurim are suspended if it's a mitzvah. So for Suda's mitzvah, you can be lenient. And so in shul, make announcements in shul, which are for the purpose of mitzvah, he can read from his notes or the list of announcements in shul if they're for mitzvah. The other posts can bring, the Shari Tshuva brings, that the minhag for the shamash to read is because, even for Sudas Rishus, is because Chazal were concerned if the shamash makes a mistake, it can lead to a terrible thing. We recently had Tisha B'Av with the story of Kamtzah and Bar Kamtzah, that if the wrong person gets invited to a party, it can lead to terrible problems. So to avoid this type of machlokes, they suspended the Gzeira in the context of Sudas. The Gemara goes on discussing this issue of reading anything because you might read Shtari Hadyotos. The Gemara says that there's writing that goes under tzura, under pictures like captions or descriptions of the picture, or under busts, under forms of statuary. You're not allowed to read those things on Shabbos. Paskin and Shulchan Aruch. If you have a wall or a curtain hangings that have pictures of animals or pictures of people, or stories from the Bible like David and Goliath, and there's an identifying caption that says, this is the picture of such and such, in case the picture isn't clear enough to figure out what it is, I guess. So you're not allowed to read those things on Shabbos. Again, the Gzeira is, it's a Gzeira, nothing wrong with that per se, but the Gzeira is you might come to read Shtari Hadyotos. This is a major Isser, so you can't read all kinds of stuff on Shabbos. Simcha B'nam Cohen says this is limited to stories or messages or descriptions of some length, but a caption that merely identifies the name, which just says David or Goliath, that's okay if you don't discuss the story. That's why you're allowed to read street signs on Shabbos, he says. You're allowed to read Main Street, First Avenue, because that's not a story, that's just a brief identifying title. You would not be allowed to read the sign, he says, that describes the historical significance of a place. Those plaques they have in buildings in Eretz Yisrael, here in the U.S., describing what battle took place here, or what famous person owned this house 300 years ago, and so on. You're not allowed to read those signs. Here, in this sugya, elsewhere in the Masechta, the Rishonim, Tosfos, and the Rosh say, you want to read literature, stories about battles, the old Greek epics, or the Milchamas Aksuvin Balaz, or Melitzos Mishalom Shal Sichas Chulin, different types of what we would call literature. You're not allowed to read them on Shabbos because based on this Gemara, you're not allowed to read captions of pictures. So you can't read literature, essentially. And even B'chol, the post can say, even during the week, they're not sure you can read them. It's Moshe Leitzim. It's a frivolous occupation and a waste of time. You certainly can't read them on Shabbos because of the Gzeira of you can't read anything because you might read Shtari Hadyotos. Even during the week, it's a problem. The Shulchan Aruch paskins this way, that you are not allowed to read Melitzos and Mishalom Shal Sichas Chulin, gives various examples. stories of battles. You can't read them on Shabbos. You can't read them even during the week because of Moshe Leitzin, and so on. And if it's pornographic, if it's literature that arouses the passions or other isurim involved. But on Shabbos in particular, there's an isur because of the gzeira of shtar hedyotos. There is, however, one major exception. There is a machlokus. Certainly you can read Divrei Torah. There's a machlokus about reading chachma, reading other types of chachma, math or science. So Shitas Rambam is that you're only allowed to read Torah, you're not allowed to read even chachma. Other Rishonim say you are allowed to read chachma. How do we paskin? Mishnah Berurah brings, the poskim say, we paskin, the minig is lahakel, you're allowed to read chachma, science, other types of things. The minig is timekel. However, the Rabbah says that a Yarei Shamayim, someone who has fear of heaven, should be stringent because the Ram and the Ran aser. Other poskim bring other reasons besides the technical gzeiro shtari hadyotos. They say Shabbos is given for the study of Torah, and a person should have his mind on loftier things and more spiritual things. But Mikra Din, it's machlokas rishonim, the minig is timekel, but a Yarei Shamayim should be machmir. Simcha Bunim Cohen is quite strict. He says apparently history is not considered wisdom because it says you're not allowed to read Sifrei Milchamos. So even though science and wisdom is a machlokes, but literature is aser, so history is aser. You're not allowed to read. He says secular history books, magazines, certainly novels you're not allowed to read. All these things you're not allowed to read. The problem is that whatever the Shulchan Aruch meant, whatever Tosas meant by stories of battles, you're not allowed to read during the week either, because of Moshe Leitzin. So if we really consider literature and history not chachma, but simply sipurei milchamos, you wouldn't be allowed to read them during the week. So unless you're prepared to prohibit these things during the week, then it would seem that you have to consider them to have somewhat more value, maybe consider chachma, and then maybe you would be allowed to read them on Shabbos. So it's not so clear. Rabbi Yair Hoffman talks about this a little bit. He says, on the one hand, you're really only allowed to read the heter the post can give is only for chachma. What about things like economics or carpentry or soft sciences? He brings from the Aruch Shabbos, Rabbi Reuben says, that's not chachma. Like Rav Simcha Bunim Cohen says, chachma is only the classic sciences and math. These are not chachma. Rabbi Hoffman says other poskim disagree. He doesn't name these poskim. Literature also, he says he heard different opinions from poskim. So, not so clear. But again, if you really consider them in the category of the Shulchan Aruch, they'll be asked to read even during the week. If we read them during the week, again, one could make the argument you can read them on Shabbos as well. What about newspapers? So newspapers sounds like it should be the gzeira of shtar hedyotos. However, Rav Simcha Bunim Cohen brings that there are poskim who said newspapers are mutter. They might contain information that is of vital interest to the safety or to the protection of a person's assets. That's the heter of mitzvah to protect yourself and your assets. Contemporary poskim say it doesn't apply today. We don't get critical news from newspapers. Now, in those days, you found out about a pogrom heading your way from a newspaper. Today, if that was happening, you'd find out from other communications, electronic communications, and therefore maybe you shouldn't be able to read newspapers. Some poskim say newspapers contain valuable information, health, or other things, which might be in the category of permitted reading on Shabbos. Some poskim just say newspaper is onik Shabbos, and that itself is a heter. Rabbi Cohen says most poskim reject that. If that would be a heter, that would be another heter for reading literature. But again, it seems that this heter is somewhat dubious. You certainly can't read business papers. Wall Street Journal, Rabbi Simcha Bunim Cohen says, and you certainly can't read advertisements. You're allowed to read Torah, Jewish thought, Jewish philosophy. That you're allowed to read. In the Pnei Halacha of Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, he says you're allowed to read a newspaper for informative content, Mikra Din. If you enjoy the news, you can read the news, stories, analysis, but you should not read sad things on Shabbos. You're not supposed to make yourself sad on Shabbos. He even says you're allowed to read financial information, general financial articles, as long as they don't give practical advice. When you read the business section, some people are deciding whether to buy or sell, and some people are just interested in business, the same way they're interested in the theater or politics. So Rabbi Melamed seems to say in Mikra Din you would be allowed to read those things, but you cannot read advertisements, at least if it's an advertisement, something you might actually buy. But he notes this is all Mikra Din. Even he says that many say you should avoid reading anything on Shabbos because it's full of advertisements and because it's full of disturbing news that gets you upset on Shabbos. And Shabbos is for Torah. So his bottom line is, his recommendation is, if the news is not disturbing and it's informative, you can read it, but you should read it only in the bathroom when you can't be studying Torah anyway. Daf Kuf Nun, the Gemara talks about, we mentioned earlier, the heter of Cheshbona Shel Mitzvah. The isser of reading and talking in a non-Shabbostic way is derived from the pasuk of Mimitzoch Hefzecha V'Deber Davar. In Yeshaya, We say it in Kiddush. Some people say it in Kiddush. And Cheftecha is Mimtzal Cheftecha, your chafetzim, your affairs are prohibited on Shabbos. Cheftei Shemayim, God's affairs of heaven, like mitzvahs, are mutter. The Gemara gives examples of making arrangements for tzedakah or other matters of public importance you're allowed to do on Shabbos. The Gemara goes on and says you can make arrangements to marry young girls. You can make arrangements to teach boys Lamda Sefer, to teach him Torah, or even to teach him a trade, because a trade is also considered a mitzvah. All these things are mutter because that's considered Cheftei Shemayim. Hirhurim Mutarim, Ulashadech Habanos, B'tinuch Lamda Sefer. That's what we sing in Mayedidus. So these things are mutter based on this Gemara. The Shulchan Aruch brings this heter, and he says that the Ramah brings machlokes mishaberachs. When a person gets an aliyah and makes a mishaberach and a pledge for tzedakah, there is a shita. He says that you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos, but the minhag is to do it. The minhag is still to do it today, and the reason it's mutter is because Cheftei Shemayim, to make arrangements for tzedakah, is mutter. So our appeals, our mishaberachs are mutter, and that's indeed our minhag. That on Shabbos and Yom Tov we have mishaberachs and appeals. The Gemara also says another heter, another example of the type of talking about business and money that's mutter is if it is shalma bekach. If it's irrelevant, it doesn't have any practical significance. The Gemara discusses what exactly that means. So, but the bottom line is the halacha, as we pass on Shulchan Aruch, as per the conclusion of the Gemara, is that even if it's events that occurred in the past, if they still have ramifications, you still owe somebody money, you might owe somebody money. So discussing these affairs are discussing issues of practical significance. That's usher. But if they're settled, the account is closed. At this point, it's just gossip and has no material significance. That's mutter, that's called cheshbono shel mabakach. Mishnah Berurah brings that the Rambam, when he brings this heter, that cheshbonos that have no practical significance are okay. So the Rambam says you're allowed to talk about these things because they're simply sicha betela. They're simply worthless, idle chatter that has no tzorach. Maggid Mishnah says, by using somewhat pejorative language, Rambam is telling you, yes, it's mutter. It doesn't fall afoul of the absolute isser of Mimtzal Cheftecha v'daber davar. However, it's not really appropriate to talk about this ever, even during the week. A Yorech should talk about more substantial things. Other poskim also say that it's bittul Torah, and a person should not engage in idle gossip if there's no point to it. The Gemara goes on. The Gemara says that you're allowed to say, I'm going to such and such a place tomorrow, even if that place is outside the tchum, if it would be possible to get there via burganin, even if there are no actual burganin. Burganin are these little huts that extend the tchum further than its normal, than the actual city limit. Since if there would be burganin, you can go there, even if there are no burganin. So it actually is outside the tchum. Since it's not absolutely usher to make that trip, you're allowed to say that you're going to go there. This is the basic halacha. You're not allowed to say on Shabbos you're going to do something after Shabbos that's usher. However, if what you're describing is something that could be mutter in other circumstances, then that is mutter. So you're allowed to say, I'm going to go to such and such a place, even if it's outside the tchum, because it could be possible via burganin. And other examples also, you're allowed to say that you're not allowed to say, get me, I plan on getting, or get me, or I plan on getting these peiros if the peiros are muktzah, but something which is not inherently usher, then you are allowed to say, because even if it actually is usher, if it's not inherently usher, if there is some alternative way it could be mutter, then that is okay. Mishnah Berurah explains, you're not allowed to say, I'm going to take the train, I'm going to ride on an animal on tomorrow, because that is absolutely usher. There's no way that he's talking about wagons and horses, which are usher. Train is a whole discussion whether trains are automatically usher or not. But you're not allowed to say you're going to do something which is inherently usher. But you're allowed to say, I'm going to go there tomorrow, even if your plan is to go there on an animal. If you don't specify how you're going to go, you just say, I'm going to go, and there is a way of going that's mutter, that's okay. Poskim, I think, say that same thing applies today. You're allowed to say, I'm going to go to New York tomorrow. You're not allowed to say, I'm going to drive to New York tomorrow. That's the general rule. You're allowed to say you're going to do something if there is a way of doing it that it would be mutter. You're not allowed to say you're going to do something if the thing inherently is usher, or if the language you use is the language of something that is usher. The Gemara says you're not allowed to do your chafetzim. You're not allowed to do things that are usher on Shabbos before Havdalah. The Gemara discusses what if you're mavdil in tefillah. The Gemara goes back and forth. La halacha we paskin that if you don't make Havdalah, you can't do malacha. However, if you're mavdil b'tefillah, if you already said the bracha b'tachan antanu in Shemona Esrei, then you're allowed to do malacha, even if you did not yet make Havdalah Halachos. if you didn't even make Havdalah and Tefillah yet, then you didn't do Havdalah and Tefillah or on the coast, then you say Baruch Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'chol. You don't say Baruch Atah Hashem. You don't make the full Baruch of Havdalah. But that's the third option. Saying Baruch Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'chol allows you to do Malacha. Women, the Shulchan Aruch brings, the Ramah brings, if they don't daven Marab, they don't say Havdalah and Tefillah, before they do any Malacha, they should say Baruch Hamavdil. There is a sheet in the poskim that only applies to serious Malacha, Malacha Gemura, like writing and weaving, but simply lighting a candle or just carrying, those are minor Malachas. Most poskim reject that and they say Malacha is Malacha. If it's Asr, it's Asr. And people have to understand they should not be doing any Malacha on Motzei Shabbos unless they've done either Havdalah and Tefillah or said Baruch Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'chol. Daf Kuf Nun Aleph. The Gemara talks about a non-Jew who brought flutes. They used to use the flutes as part of the funeral ritual for Hesped. So if the non-Jew brought flutes on Shabbos for the Yisrael can't use them because either if they came out from outside the Tchum or if they were carried in Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos or a place you're not allowed to carry. This is how we paskin, that you're not allowed to benefit from a malacha that a non-Jew did for you on Shabbos, even if the malacha is just Tchum or carrying. You're not allowed to use those items he brought for you. If it was done for the Jew himself has to, if it was malacha deraisa, you have to wait till after Shabbos, b'kdei yasu, how much time it would take for the malacha to be done after Shabbos. You don't benefit from the fact that it was done on Shabbos. If it's malacha d'Rabbanan, it's more lenient. Other people can even use it on Shabbos, but you yourself still have to wait till after Shabbos. In general, this creates we don't really have flutes for funerals, but in general, this comes up in all kinds of modern real-world scenarios. There are other sources in Gemara and Halacha for this. The idea that if a non-Jew does malacha for a Jew, we had some of them earlier, if a non-Jew lit a candle, and other examples we had in the Gemara that the Jew is not allowed to benefit. But even with regard to deliveries and carrying, this in the modern question, in the modern society, this comes up in the context of deliveries, postal deliveries, deliveries from shopping, package deliveries, and so on. So all these cases, the question is the item muktzah? Are you allowed to accept the package? Are you allowed to open the package? Are you allowed to use the item inside the package? So there are a variety of different issues involved. Opening packages is a whole separate set of problems. Regarding reading mail, so the Shulchan Aruch says that you're allowed to read it, but you shouldn't read it out loud. You should just read it with your eyes. And however, the Shulchan Aruch says if it came from outside the Tchum, you shouldn't touch it at all. It's a question of muktzah. The poskim in general say it's not muktzah because, again, since it's only drabanan, it's only also for the person for whom it was brought. For other people, it would be. In general, the halacha is for other people they would be allowed to use it, but the Shulchan Aruch says it is a question of muktzah. The Biur Halacha brings, the Mishnah Berurah brings that the Chachamim say it's not muktzah because, as we said, since other people can use it, but actually reading the letter is a big machlokes. The Shulchan Aruch says you can read it. As we said earlier, newspapers, some posts can say you can read because it might have important information. Letters, the Shulchan Aruch says, if you don't know what it says and it might have important information, you can read it. But other posts can say you should not read it. They say first of all, this is considered hana from malacha that a non-Jew did. Reading it is hana. The Shulchan Aruch apparently holds that unlike using the flute for the funeral, or unlike actually, let's say, eating the food that he brought you, using the light that he lit, reading the letter is not really called hana from malacha that a non-Jew did. But other poskim, the Mishnah Berurah brings are more strict. They say that the other poskim say that the Gaon says that is considered hana from something that came outside the Tchum. And even though some poskim say that the isser of having hana from something that a malacha was done is because you might tell him to do it by letters, you don't have that. You don't know who's sending you letters. You can't tell somebody to write you a letter. But he says other poskim say the reason is just that you're not supposed to have any hana from malacha that was done on Shabbos. It's always usher. These criteria, these considerations all apply when you get packages. So there is a question of muktzah. Muktzah, the poskim say, despite the fact that Shulchan Aruch says is a chumrah, muktzah is not such an issue unless the thing is inherently muktzah, like the delivery you get is of muktzah items, or money, or bills, or something like that, the business stuff. If it's just something that you can use on Shabbos, it's food, or it's a toy, or something you can use on Shabbos, it wouldn't be muktzah. But to actually have hana from it is a problem of having hana from something that malacha was done. Malacha of either being brought from outside the tchum, or was carried in Rosh Hashanah or in a Carmelis. So that would be a problem. Again, some poskim say that if it's delivery, it isn't being done directly for you, especially if the contemporary Rabbanim argue that they don't know who the customers are, they just ship things out, maybe there's more basis for leniency, but there is potentially a problem of having hana from malacha that was done for a Jew. There's another chumrah the Mishnah Berurah brings that you shouldn't accept the letter straight from the postman. If he was carrying it in a Rishus Harabim and you take it and you're in the Rishus Yachid, you've done part of the hotzah. You should tell him to put it on the ground. So there's no chance of you doing part of the malacha of hotzah on Shabbos. The Mishnah goes on. The Mishnah talks about we're not ma'atzmin as a mace, that we don't do certain things they used to do to the deceased. So we don't do this on Shabbos. We don't even do it during the week. Im yitzias nefesh, we don't do it right after the person died, because doing that can actually, if he's still alive, if he's a goses, if he's hovering on the edge of death, and you do this to someone who is do this to him, to close his eyes. So if you do that, you can actually, I think that's what it means, you can actually bring about his death, and it's shofek dam, that would be murder. In general, we paskin you can't touch a goses, you shouldn't handle him in any way. His life is so tenuous, as the Gemara explains, anything you do can hasten his death, and therefore you must avoid touching a goses, not just on Shabbos, even during the week. Rikiveger says that if there's a fire in the house, you can move him to get him out of the house. Meaning that if it's for his own good, then touching him is the lesser of two evils. Letting him die in the conflagration is worse. Then you can move him out. Nishmas Avram says that in general we do things for the we do things for the mate, we do things for the goses. A doctor or anybody can perform any service for the benefit of the goses, even if you're going to move him. If you judge that's in his best interest, then you should do it. It just means you shouldn't touch him. You shouldn't touch him for no reason. You shouldn't touch him for no reason, but you can handle him if it's for his own good. However, he says things that are not for his own good, even if they're just routine, especially in hospitals, they have all kinds of things they do, just routine blood pressures and blood draws and stuff. So just to handle the goses, if there's no concrete benefit, you can't claim that doing this test or this routine monitoring is going to do any good for him, that you should not do to the goses, because that can actually hasten his death, and there's no good reason for doing it. The one reason he gives, he says, is if he's aware, and if he sees that you're not doing the regular monitoring, he'll realize you've given up on him, and he might become distressed and agitated. That might hasten his death. That might be a reason to do it, he says. But ordinarily, you should be careful about doing routine testing and handling a goses because of this concern that it can hasten his death. The Nishmas Avram also brings that many poskim say that if you need to move him to help somebody else, in a hospital, he's blocking the way, or you need to move him to provide aid to somebody else, if you're very careful not to injure him, not to hasten his death, you can do that, because even though there is a stern warning not to manipulate a goses, it's not a certain thing that you're going to kill him. It's a concern, and in the place, and when you have to weigh that concern against helping other people is paramount, and therefore you can move him very carefully. But the Hiras Rabbah, you can move him to provide aid to somebody else. Daf Kufn and Beis, the Gemara brings this idea that people who are shotuf bezima, who are too absorbed, who are too involved in zima, in lascivious behavior, it's bad for them. It causes them to age prematurely. Zikna kofetzasila. The term zima generally means erva, generally means immoral sexual behavior, but the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch apparently understand this applies to too much sexual intercourse in general. This is brought in general that a person should be very careful not to indulge in too much of that type of activity that causes all kinds of terrible problems. Rambam says, Shulchan Aruch brings it, and including the premature aging. So they understood it's not a punishment for zima, for immoral behavior. It just means overindulgence in these carnal activities is unhealthy. It doesn't say exactly what's considered too much. Some contemporary Rabbanim say it depends on the age, depends what's normal for a person of that age. I'm not even sure how you can say it depends on the age. Different people have different libidos, different levels of appetite, so hard to know exactly what this means. Interesting tshuva in the Halachos Ketanos. He discusses why Chazal were not masaking the bracha of Asher Yatzar after a person engages in these activities. So he has a couple of reasons. One of his reasons is because Asher Yatzar is only on something that's healthy and salubrious for the body, but sexual activity, the Rambam says, the Shulchan Aruch says, is often bad for you. It's often dangerous. They weren't masaking a bracha on something that's bad. And it follows, he says, after. Maybe it follows, he says, that if a person follows the advice of the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch and only engages in this activity when appropriate and when healthy, maybe you should make a bracha. Certainly not accepted practice. But again, modern science, I don't think, agrees with this assessment of the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch that maybe excessive, too much might be a problem, but just normal indulgence in this activity, I don't think is believed to be unhealthy. So exactly how we're supposed to be practically guided by this, I'm not sure. On Daf Kufner and Gimel, beginning of Parak Misha Hachshech, the Gemara talks about someone has property, he's outside, and it's Shabbos already, and he can't carry it. If he just leaves it there, it'll be lost. And is there any heter? Is there any way he can bring it in? So the Mishnah and the Gemara have a variety of things Chazal allowed him to do, various forms of carrying midrabanan, which would normally be usher, but Chazal allowed them in this case. It talks about someone at Tekshech, he's caught outside, it's Shabbos already, he has his wallet, his kiss, you can give it to a non-Jew. There are various other solutions. Why are you allowed to do this? The Gemara says, why? Because the Gemara says a person is so desperate to preserve his money. If Chazal would have said, nope, don't do anything, just leave it there, a person wouldn't withstand the temptation. He would just carry it himself 4 amos and Rosh Hashanah. So as a form of harm reduction, they said, we'll give you the outlet of asking a non-Jew to do it in order to make sure you don't come to carry it by yourself. The Gemara discusses Mitzia. What if you find an object in the street on Shabbos? Can you have the same heter? The Gemara says no, because your own property, you're so distressed about losing that they have to give you this heter because they were afraid that you would carry yourself if they don't give you the heter. Mitzia, the Gemara says that it's easy come, easy go, you didn't work on it. So Mitzia, the Gemara says, Teku, the Mitzia is not clear whether you have the same heter. In Shulchan Aruch, we pass in Mitzia, there is no heter. Unless you acquired the Mitzia Mibad Yom. If you already picked up the Mitzia before Shabbos, then it's like your property. The fact that it was easy come, once it's yours, we treat it like your property. But if you encounter a Mitzia on Shabbos, there's no heter at all. But your own property, they have the heter of asking a non-Jew to carry it. The Gemara goes on. The Gemara gives other possibilities, having a cherishot of a katan, people who are not obligated in mitzvahs, someone who's not of sound mind, or a minor. The Gemara goes through a hierarchy. Which of these is preferable? But even a katan can be preferable. Even a katan is okay. The Gemara says even a katan is okay if you have to. Again, it's still better than carrying it yourself. They allowed you to give it even to a katan if necessary. Shulchan Aruch brings the machlokes. Some said this is only if hechshech lo baderech. If you were traveling earlier in the day and you got stuck, it's not your fault. You're sort of an onus. They allowed you to do it. But if someone left his house right before Shabbos, that's irresponsible. That's pshia. That's negligence. And then there's no heter. That's machlokes. You just have to drop it in the street. And at best, you can ask a non-Jew to watch it for you, but they didn't give you any heterim in that case. That is a machlokes. The Gemara says we have various heterim. The Gemara talks about the heter of the non-Jew, the heter of the katan, other heterim. The Gemara says one more heter there is, the Gemara that we didn't want to disclose. The Chum didn't want to publicize it. What is the heter? The heter is carrying it in intervals, each one of less than 4 amos. Hotzah, the malacha of hotzah is only violated if you carry 4 amos. If you carry less than 4 amos, it's you don't violate the malacha, even if your house is far away. So carrying it in multiple stages, each stage is only less than 4 amos, that you're allowed to do. Chazal didn't want to publicize this, but in Shulchan Aruch, this is brought down. If you have no other solution, you can do this thing of carrying less than 4 amos. Only your own property or a mitzvah that you acquired before Shabbos, they allow this. This is a very problematic solution. Mishnah Berurah explains it's very easy to come to violate actual hotzah by just going more than 4 amos, so Chazal really didn't want you to do this. They allowed it only in desperation. Otherwise, if there's no other solution, and he's going to suffer a loss, and he might come to carry on Shabbos himself, the proper carrying, they gave him this outlet. But really, we don't want you to do this without a really good reason. Chazal did not let you do this. Also, this only works in the Rosh Hashanah or in the Carmelis. What do you do when you get to your house? Going from the public domain, Rosh Hashanah or Carmelis, to your house, no matter how brief the distance is, 1 amma, less than an amma, is always usher. So for that, you have to do a different form of hotzah d'Rabbanan. You have to do it with a shinui. Throw it in with your shoulder to just push it in somehow and not carry it in the normal way. Post can say that that carrying less than 4 amos, it's preferable if you have 2 people do it. If 2 people alternate going 3 amos each one or something like that, that is much better, and that's much better. If you yourself are carrying it, you have to stop every less than 4 amos, and you have to stop to take a breath. If you're omed l'chatev to adjust the burden, that's not called stopping, even if you actually remain motionless. If you have to stop to take a breath, that's called stopping. Even if you don't put the thing down, even if you're just carrying it, but you stop and pause, that breaks up the hotzah. That would be considered less than 4 amos at a time. The Mishnah Berurah says yesh machmirim. Some are more stringent and say you actually have to sit down or put the chayfetz down. So that's a machlokes. The Gemara goes on. The Gemara brings one final heter. The Gemara says if you were walking before Shabbos and suddenly you realize now it's Shabbos, then you can just keep walking, because the Hotzah Daraisa is only violated if you pick it up and put it down on Shabbos. If the picking up was before Shabbos and you never stopped on Shabbos and you keep on walking, also you haven't done Hotzah Daraisa. This is really not a good solution. This, the Mishnah Berurah says again, is only if there's no non-Jew and there's no animal and there's no cheireshot v'katan and you can't do less than 4 amos. This is the worst of all the solutions. This to rely on the fact that I didn't pick it up, we only do when this is really the last resort. You can't do even less than 4 amos. Why can't you do less than 4 amos? Because you're worried about bandits who are going to steal it if you stop. If you don't get home as soon as possible, bandits will steal it. So, or there's water, there's a gap of more than 4 amos you have to cross, so there's no solution of going less than 4 amos. This is a really undesirable solution. You can't even walk, you have to run. Running is a hecker to remind you that you can't stop, and so they allowed you to run, they allowed you to do this. If you have to, again, if there's no other solution. Post can bring a machlokes, Shulchan Aruch brings machlokes, whether this is true only for a bundle or even for a wallet. What's the difference? That, again, you have to vashinu, you have to run if there's something unusual. So running with a heavy bundle is unusual, but running with a kiss, running is not so distinctive. Some people run for other reasons. But others say, who doesn't kiss, you can be leaning for a kiss as well. Again, provided that there are there's no other solution. Some say even for a kiss, running is distinctive enough, you can do that. The Mishnah Berurah brings from the Taz, Hamekil lo hifsid, that if you're lenient, it's acceptable to be lenient. But the Magen Avraham says that we don't have Rishus Harabim. Poskim often say that our streets are not Rishus Harabim. So the Magen Avraham says that since we don't have Rishus Harabim, you can be more lenient. Even if there are other solutions, it's not so bad to rely on the solution of not stopping. So today things are more lenient. So today we can rely more comfortably on this program of not stopping. This comes up also if a person poskim bring these types of solutions. Person accidentally carries something out on Shabbos and forgot. You have all these different possible solutions to get it back inside if you have to, of non-Jew or katan or less than 4 amos if you have to, or of not stopping. Again, these are all not ideal, but depending on what options are available, sometimes these are going to be the best solutions that you have. The Ramah also adds to this din. The Ramah says that if the person is outside, if he's carrying muktzah. So if he's inside, it says he realizes he's carrying muktzah, he could just carry it to wherever he wants and then release it and put it down. If he's outside, he really shouldn't carry it because outside there's no air. Assuming there's no air, if he's outside, he shouldn't carry it. He should just drop it, assuming it's in a secure location. But the Ramah allows you, that if it's not a question of carrying, the Ramah allows you to keep on carrying the muktzah to deposit it wherever you want. The Mishnah Berurah brings that the Gaon was machmer. The Gaon says, even if you realize you're carrying muktzah, you should not keep carrying it somewhere else. You should put it down. You should put it down wherever it is. However, in a case where if you just drop it, if you just release the belt, release the muktzah, it'll fall to the ground and it'll get damaged, lost or damaged. Maybe even the Gaon, he says, efshir. Maybe even the Gaon is matir, allows you to keep carrying it to be able to put it down in a more secure location.